This is The Big Breakdown, a long look back at some of the biggest stories we're covering for you at the Hidden Killers Podcast and True Crime Today. This is the Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Bruschi and continuing coverage of the case against Bryan Kohberger.
So picture this, it's June 5th, 25. Prosecutors in Idaho are basically having a legal meltdown. They've just filed what I can only describe as the judicial equivalent of, are you effing kidding me right now? Bryan Kohberger's defense team wants to delay his murder trial again. The reason this time? Wait for it. A Dateline episode and a James Patterson book. I'm not making this stuff up. After 2.5 years of preparing to try a man allegedly responsible for one of the most horrific crimes in recent memory, the defense is clutching their pearls over some true crime content that really doesn't matter if it's been out there. Some's been released, some has not. The book, not out yet. But just in case, Bryan better have a little cushion before he steps into that courtroom. You know, it's Bryan. Let me back up, because if you are not familiar with this case, you need to understand why the latest move is making prosecutors lose their minds. November 13th of 2022, 4 University of Idaho students are murdered in their off-campus home. Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Young people with their whole lives ahead of them, killed in what police described as a targeted attack. The surviving roommate, Dylan Mortensen, allegedly sees a masked man leaving the house that night. She's the only eyewitness. Remember that detail because it comes to be very important just a little later on in this story. Fast forward to December 30th of 2022. Police arrest Bryan Kohberger, a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, just a few miles away from Moscow, Idaho. The evidence against him, according to prosecutors, is overwhelming. They've got his DNA on a knife sheath found at the crime scene. Not just any DNA, mind you, but what they call single source DNA, meaning it's not mixed with anyone else. They've got surveillance footage of his white Hyundai Elantra near the victim's home. Cell phone data allegedly puts him in the area multiple times before the murders. And get this, when police ask him about his whereabouts that night, his alibi is that he was out driving around looking at the moon and stars on a very cloudy night at 3 a.m. in November in Idaho. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean infuriating. If you're the prosecution, since his arrest, Kohberger's defense team has been playing what I like to call the legal delay bingo. Get your card out, and you just see where, ooh, postage stamp. I won an orange at the old folks' home. So I used to play bingo, kids. I would beat the hell out of those 80-year-olds, let me tell you. And I would take their dimes, their little debbies, and anything that wasn't nailed down to the ground. I walked out of there like a baller, waving at those old folks in their chairs, going, ha, 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 I'm going to walk out of here while you roll. Okay, I'm kidding. I really enjoyed hanging out with the old folks when I was younger. And it was fun. It was my great-grandma. And we played bingo. And I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed winning my dime or my little Debbie or whatever they were giving away that day. Happy memories. Not like this story, though. In October of 2023, they waived his right to a speedy trial. Check. Then they successfully get the trial moved 300 miles away to Moscow from Moscow to Boise. Check. They file motion after motion after motion trying to suppress evidence. The DNA evidence, they want it thrown out. The cell phone data, it's inadmissible, they say. The surveillance footage, problems there too, apparently. Well, Judge Stephen Himpler denies every single one of those motions, but that doesn't stop them from trying. The defense team, led by attorney Ann Taylor, has assembled what sounds like a small army. 3 trial attorneys, 2 investigators, and more than a dozen experts. They've submitted 2,100 pages of what they call mitigation materials. They've identified 132 exhibits and 55 potential witnesses just for the penalty phase. Over 1,000 exhibits and nearly 200 witnesses for the actual trial. 5 mental health professionals have done what prosecutors describe as a deep dive into Kohberger's background, and yet somehow they need a little more time. Here's what really gets me about this latest delay request. The defense is arguing that the media coverage, specifically the Dateline episode and the upcoming Patterson book, will taint the jury pool. But there has been a gag order in place since 23. Nobody involved in the case is supposed to talk to the media. So they're mad about what came out on Dateline. That potential jurors might watch that. And it rehashes publicity available elsewhere for the last 3 years. And someone might read a book about a murder case. That's never happened before. They're trying to treat this like it's 1985, and it's not. It's 2025. And things have changed. The way people absorb information has changed. And you know what? You're not going to get around that with any sort of order or delay. The longer you wait, the more people are going to see. In the age of Netflix and true crime podcasts, good luck finding 12 people who haven't heard about this case. And that's just kind of the way it is. Trust me, there's plenty of people who don't touch true crime. You will find them. Trials go on all over the place, all the time. You'll figure it out. Prosecutor Bill Thompson is having none of it. In his June 5th filing, he basically tells the judge that delaying the trial will only create more opportunities for pretrial publicity, not fewer. Yes, common sense. I like trying to stop people from talking about something by giving them more time to talk about it. The logic doesn't track. Thompson points out that the state has processed 95% of their evidence. They've turned over 51 terabytes of digital evidence to the defense. 51 terabytes. You know how much data that is? It's like, actually, I can't even come up with a comparison that makes sense. It's an insane amount of information. But here's the kicker. The defense claims they're not ready because they haven't received all the expert reports from the prosecution. The prosecution says they've disclosed 25 expert witnesses and provided everything required under court orders. It's the classic he said, she said expert in the case. It's more like, we gave you everything versus we need to investigate our client's entire life history before we can go to trial. Let's talk about that for a second. The defense wants to conduct what prosecutors call a scorch-the-earth life history investigation. They apparently want to examine every moment of Bryan Kohberger's existence to prepare for trial. Look, I get it. It's a death penalty case. The stakes couldn't be higher. But at what point does thorough preparation cross into just basically delay tactics? When you've had 2.5 years, when you got a team of attorneys and experts, when you've already compiled thousands of pages of materials, the prosecution brings up something that should make everyone pause. The victims' families have constitutional rights too. Under Idaho's Victims' Rights Amendment, they have a right to a timely disposition of the case. Can you imagine your child, your sibling, your friend is murdered and you have to wait years for justice while the defense files motion after motion, delay after ridiculous delay? Every postponement is another wound. Every delay is another period of time of limbo where closure materials just remain out of reach. And speaking of affecting people, remember Dylan Mortensen, the surviving roommate who allegedly saw the killer? She's been waiting to testify for over 2 years now. Memory fades. Details get fuzzy. The longer this drags on, the more her testimony might be affected. Former FBI agent Mike Gilman pointed this out, saying the defense has been able to stall it over and over again. Legal analyst Royal Oakes was even more blunt, calling it a defense strategy of delay. That's working beautifully. Here's what really burns me up about the whole situation. The defense filed what they call an alternative perpetrator theory. Basically, they are saying that someone else did it. But when Judge Hippler asked for actual evidence to support this theory, he got what he described as just allegations. The judge literally said much of their filing was potentially fairly objectionable in terms of admissibility. Translation, you can't just throw theories at the wall and see what sticks. But he's looking at it. He's doing his job. The prosecution also takes issue with how the defense characterizes the discovery process. The defense has accused prosecutors of slow-walking evidence, which Thompson calls utter nonsense. He calls everything requested has been provided. But here's where it gets almost comical. The defense is complaining about audio evidence related to video footage, claiming prosecutors have withheld the audio You know what this audio sounds like? It sounds like someone who's run out of legitimate complaints and is now nitpicking about whether the surveillance video came with sound, which, by the way, most surveillance footage does not come with sound. It's surveillance footage. Let's step back and look at the pattern here. December 22 arrest, October 23 waive speedy trial rights, throughout 24 multiple motions to suppress evidence, all denied. Successful venue change, failed attempt at interlocutory appeal to the Idaho Supreme Court, and now June 25, please delay because of media coverage that hasn't happened yet. Do you see what's happening? This isn't about being unprepared, it's about running out the clock. The legal precedent is pretty clear on this stuff. There's a Supreme Court case called Vermont versus Brilliant that says delays caused by defendants of their counsel weigh against them and generally won't support a speedy trial claim. In other words, you can't create your own delays and then complain about how long everything is taking. There's another case, Barker versus Wingo, that lays out factors in courts that they should consider when deciding about delays. The prosecution is basically saying, look at all these factors, Judge, we're ready. The evidence is strong. The victims deserve justice. What more do you need? And about that evidence being strong, let's review what prosecutors allegedly have. DNA on the knife sheath. That matches Kohberger. Kind of a big one right there. Surveillance footage of his car. Cell phone data, putting him in the area. An alibi that sounds like something a creative writing student would come up with too much coffee. I was looking at the moon and stars. Really? That's what you're going with? Really? Deputy Attorney General Ingrid Batesy apparently asked how cell tower data could possibly support this alibi. I'd love to know the answer to that one, too. The defense has had every opportunity to prepare. They've got resources that most defendants could only dream of. Multiple attorneys, investigators, experts. They've been given tons of terabytes of evidence. They've had 2.5 years. At some point, you have to fish or cut bait. You can't keep asking for more time because you want to investigate every single moment of your client's life, or because someone might make a TV show about your case that's been national news for years. What's really going on? The defense knows the evidence is bad. Really bad. When you've got your client's DNA at a murder scene and his best explanation for being out that night is lunar observation, you're not working with a lot. So what do? You delay. You file motions. You complain about discovery. You worry about books that haven't been published yet. You do everything except go to trial, because going to trial means facing that evidence in front of 12 jurors who are going to wonder why a PhD student in criminology was allegedly creeping around a house where 4 people ended up dead. The prosecution's message is clear. Enough is enough. They quote directly, "It's time to try the case." They argue there's no legal authority to support the defendant's desire for more time. They point out that the Idaho Supreme Court precedent doesn't require the defense to investigate every aspect of a defendant's life before trial. They emphasize the victim's rights and their family's need for closure. They've done everything but hire a skywriter to spell out "stop stalling" over the courthouse. Look, I understand the gravity of a death penalty case. I understand the need for transparency. I understand the need for a vigorous defense, but there's a difference between being thorough and being obstructionist. There's a difference between protecting your client's rights and gaming the system. After 2.5 years with mountains of evidence disclosed, teams of lawyers and experts at their disposal, and multiple failed attempts to suppress evidence, the defense's latest delay tactic based on hypothetical media coverage feels less like legitimate legal strategy and more like desperation. Judge Hippler has a decision to make. Does he grant yet another delay in a case that's already been postponed from June to August of 25? Does he tell the victims' families they have to wait even longer for their day in court? Does he let concerns about a TV show override the constitutional right to a timely trial? Or does he finally say what prosecutors are begging him to say? It's time. The oral arguments are set for June 18th of 2025. That's when we'll find out if this legal merry-go-round keeps spinning or if someone finally hits the stop button. Because at some point, justice delayed really does become justice denied. And in a case where 4 young people allegedly lost their lives in the most horrific way imaginable, haven't we delayed long enough? The moon and the stars will still be there after the trial. Bryan Kohberger should probably start preparing to explain why he was allegedly looking at them on a night 4 students died. Give me your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of this case? Where it's going, where we're at right now? Should it be delayed? It is a death penalty case. Or have they had enough time and Ann Taylor's going to request to delay this basically until everyone's dead? Into eternity. Or is it time to get this show on the road? When you're facing the death penalty for allegedly murdering 4 college students, you'd think your defense strategy would be kind of straightforward. Prove you didn't do it. Or at least create enough doubt to save your life. But what if your approach was to hire experts who normally help convict people like you, spend hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars challenging the very scientific methods that solved the case, and essentially declare war on modern forensic investigation? That's exactly what's happening in one of the most watched murder cases in recent memory. Bryan Kohberger's defense team has hired a cell phone tracking expert who has testified for law enforcement over 100 times, but has never worked for a defense team. Cy Ray built a career helping prosecutors use cell phone data to convict defendants. And now he's testifying that Kohberger's phone data shows he was nowhere near the crime scene when 4 University of Idaho students were murdered, which is the exact opposite of the data that the prosecution is going to be presenting. But that's what's happening right now in the Bryan Kohberger case. One of the most elaborate defense strategies I think we have seen, but when you got to throw things at the wall and see what sticks, this is what you get. For those just catching up, Bryan Kohberger allegedly killed 4 University of Idaho students in November of 2022. Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Kaylee Gonzalez. They were stabbed to death in their off-campus home while 2 roommates slept downstairs, apparently unaware of the carnage happening above them. The prosecution built what seemed like a solid case around DNA evidence from a knife sheath found at the scene, cell phone data allegedly placing him near the house, and a white Hyundai Elantra matching his car caught on surveillance footage. Police used investigative genetic genealogy to identify Kohberger, confirm the match with DNA from his family's trash, and arrested him at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. It was textbook modern police work, the kind of investigation that typically results in plea bargains rather than protracted trials. But Chief Public Defender Ann Taylor had some other plans. Taylor is one of only 13 attorneys in Idaho qualified to handle death penalty cases, and she's systematically dismantling every piece of evidence and investigative technique, well, at least attempting to, that has been used to build the case against Kohberger, like a defense attorney should do. But the wrecking ball she's coming in with may be more like a bouncy ball than it actually is a true wrecking ball. Let's start with a key piece of the strategy. Kohberger's defense hired Cy Ray, the former Arizona cop who built a company called ZetX that specializes in cell phone tracking. He sold that company to LexisNexis in 2021 for an undisclosed amount and has testified as an expert witness over 100 times, almost exclusively for prosecution teams. This makes him the last person you'd expect to find working for a murder defendant. Although it can't have been easy pickings to find somebody to back up anything Kohberger has going on. Now Ray is claiming that his analysis shows Kohberger's phone was actually in the opposite direction from the crime scene during the murders. According to Ray, the data indicates Kohberger was south of Pullman, Washington, and west of Moscow, Idaho, when the killings allegedly occurred. Ray also criticized law enforcement's data collection during pretrial hearings, called it disorganized and incomplete. When someone who's built their career helping prosecutors convict people suddenly starts finding comprehensive fault with police work on his first defense case, it raises questions about the circumstances of that change. The defense explanation for where Kohberger actually was reads like a meditation guide for insomniacs. They claim he was out driving in the early morning hours as part of a long habit of going for drives alone to hike and run to see the moon and the stars. That's the alibi. This raises obvious questions. If you're regularly out driving alone at 3 in the morning to contemplate nature, why do you need to hire a specialized cell phone expert to prove it? And why does someone pursuing a PhD in criminology allegedly develop such a nocturnal habit right around the time 4 people get murdered nearby? Ray's credibility has been questioned before. A Colorado judge in 2022 found what he called a sea of unreliability in ZX's technology, excluding it from a stalking case and finding that Ray was not a credible witness. The judge noted that Ray inflated his credentials, inaccurately claiming to be an engineer, and had testified he was more of an engineer than an engineer. Okay. The court found that ZX's methods had been routinely and sharply admonished by the scientific and legal community. So there's that. Ray represents one part of the defense's expert witness strategy. The defense has assembled multiple specialists, each tasked with challenging different aspects of the prosecution's case. Enter Bika Barlow, a California attorney who claims to have led the first successful challenge to STR DNA evidence in American courts. Barlow became a full attorney on the case in February of 24, meaning Idaho taxpayers are now funding out-of-state legal expertise. Her specialty is challenging investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG, the same technique that's been used to solve cold cases like the Golden State Killer and bring justice to victims' families after decades of waiting. The contrast is notable. Investigative genetic genealogy, IgG for short, maybe we'll just call it that going forward, has been a game changer for law enforcement. It solved cases that had gone cold for decades. The technique works by taking crime scene DNA and comparing it to public genetic genealogy databases. You know, like 23andMe or Ancestry or those ones. All to identify potential relatives of the perpetrator, then building family trees to narrow down suspects. It's the reason people like the Golden State Killer finally faced justice. But now Barlow is arguing that using this technique to solve a quadruple murder somehow violated the right of the person who allegedly committed that quadruple murder. She's claiming that law enforcement violated both legal standards and the terms of service for genetic genealogy databases, which did none of the above. There is no terms in there that says you violate it, and nor does it matter, quite honestly, in a case like this. Supporting this effort is Dr. Leah Larkin, a genetic genealogist who filed an affidavit questioning the reliability of genetic genealogy databases, and Gabriela Vargas, who previously helped solve the 34-year-old Roxanne Wood murder case, but is now testifying about potential violations in how law enforcement accessed genealogy databases. After Vargas testified for the defense, the FBI started asking questions about her involvement, which the defense characterized as intimidation. The DNA challenge team also includes Dr. Greg Hampikian. This is a hard one. Hampikian. We'll go with Hampikian for now. Founder of the Idaho Innocence Project, who has helped exonerate over 30 wrongfully convicted people. Well, Hampikian's work with wrongfully convicted people is admirable. It's worth remembering that for every person wrongfully convicted using flawed DNA evidence, there are hundreds who were correctly convicted using the same techniques he now questions. Beyond technical challenges, the defense enlisted mental health experts to argue that Kohberger's autism diagnosis should exempt him from the death penalty. Dr. Rachel Orr diagnosed Kohberger with autism spectrum disorder level 1, documenting defects in social emotional reciprocity and difficulty with social cues. The defense argued that executing someone whose brain is wired differently creates an unconstitutional risk, that he would be executed because of his disability rather than his culpability, which again is a lot of BS. Judge Stephen Hippler ruled in April that the autism diagnosis doesn't automatically disqualify Kohberger from the death penalty consideration, recognizing that while mental health considerations are important, they don't automatically excuse someone from the consequences of allegedly murdering 4 innocent people, no matter how awkward you might be at a singles mixer. The defense also summoned character witnesses from Kohberger's academic past, including Dr. Michel Bolger, his former criminology professor, who described him as one of their best students ever. There's something deeply ironic about having a criminology professor testify for someone accused of committing the exact type of crime they studied together. Perhaps the most audacious aspect emerged during a May 25 hearing when the defense filed an offer of proof suggesting alternate perpetrators. The filing was immediately sealed, but defense attorney Ann Taylor indicated they found alternate suspect information and claimed to have evidence suggesting two people committed the crime with two weapons. Judge Hippler demanded more substantive evidence, suggesting even the court is skeptical about whether this theory has any sort of merit. The alternative perpetrator, and that theory represents the defense's boldest gambit yet. Instead of just arguing that the prosecution's case has flaws, they're claiming they've identified the real killers. You know, like OJ. It's extraordinarily risky because it requires the defense to essentially solve the murders themselves while defending someone who allegedly committed them. It also raises ethical questions about accusing other people of murder without having to prove those accusations in court. The comprehensive defense strategy has already suffered significant setbacks. In February 25, Judge Hippler denied all 13 motions to suppress key evidence, including DNA from a trash pull at Kohberger's parents' home and challenges to search warrants. The judge is ruling that no constitutional violations occurred in the investigative genetic genealogy process, particularly damaged the defense's efforts to exclude DNA evidence entirely. These rulings suggest that despite the expensive expert testimony and elaborate challenges to forensic techniques, the fundamental evidence collection followed established legal procedures. When a judge reviews the defense's technical objections and finds them insufficient to suppress evidence, it indicates the challenges may be more about creating confusion than actually identifying genuine procedural violations. The case has been complicated by strategic media manipulation as well, I guess if that's what you want to call it. I like to call it reporting. When a May 2025 NBC Dateline episode featured previous unreleased surveillance footage and cell phone records, the defense immediately filed motions claiming gag order violations. Represents a calculated effort to control the narrative, while the defense can't speak directly to media due to gag orders. The financial aspects are staggering. Ann Taylor is being compensated allegedly around $200 per hour for a 40-hour work week, totaling $8,000 weekly. Her second seat attorney allegedly receives $180 per hour, and investigators are paid $45 per hour, allegedly. The case has been ongoing for over 2 years with no end in sight, and the total cost will likely exceed what many small towns spend on their entire justice system. What makes this defense strangely troubling is how it weaponizes legitimate scientific debate for legal advantage. Of course, that is what, defense teams often have to do. Try to create reasonable doubt for the jury. Every forensic technique has limitations and potential sources of error, which is why scientific scrutiny is important. But there's a difference between genuine scientific inquiry and hiring experts to find fault with methods that have successfully solved thousands of cases. The irony is that some of the same experts now questioning these techniques have previously used them successfully. Ray built his career helping prosecutors use cell phone data to convict defendants. Vargas used genetic genealogy to solve cold cases, and now they're being paid to argue against the reliability of those specialties. Raises fundamental questions about whether financial incentives can influence scientific opinions. The trial is set to begin August 11th of 25 in Ada County after a successful venue change that added travel and accommodation costs. The defense has succeeded in transforming what investigators considered a solved case into an expensive examination of every forensic technique used, shifting focus from 4 dead college students to abstract questions about scientific methodology. The case represents a troubling precedent for what happens when defense attorneys have unlimited resources to challenge established investigative techniques, regardless of how successful those techniques have been in bringing justice to other victims. The outcome will determine whether established scientific methods can withstand enough money being thrown at questioning them, and whether our justice system can distinguish between legitimate scientific concerns and expensive questions. Win or lose, the defense has already cost taxpayers a fortune while questioning scientific methods that have solved countless other cases and brought closure to victims' families. They've turned a case about 4 murdered college students into an expensive academic exercise about forensic science, and that transformation might be the most troubling outcome of all. The question now is whether a jury will see through the expensive challenges to focus on the evidence, or whether enough money and expert testimony can create reasonable doubt about anything, no matter how solid the science is behind it. It's a lot of questions that are going to be coming up in this case, a lot of smoke, a lot of mirrors that are going to be needed to try and vindicate Bryan Kohberger. At the end of the day, though, it's the science that matters, the real science that matters, not just waving your hands going, well, maybe this could, but yeah. He bought the murder weapon. His DNA is on the sheath. He tried to buy a replacement sheath and knife right after the murders. There's a lot there. There's definitely a lot there. And his personality, his own words, they don't seem to help him very much either. What are your thoughts? Tell me in the comment section on YouTube. If you're listening to us on a podcast platform, be sure to check out our YouTube channel as well, Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi, and subscribe so you can watch us doing the show and also interact and let your voice be heard as well. I'm Tony Bruschi. Thank you guys for watching. We'll talk again real soon.
Craving non-stop true crime updates? Press subscribe now and get the latest cases, analysis, and expert commentary delivered straight to your feed, only from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.